Okay then, so it's 1 minute past two. I'm sure we'll have a few other people joining us in the next couple of minutes or so. But without further ado, I think it's time for us to kick off. Hello everybody, welcome to the second ChatTalent webinar of 2018, but the very first webinar we've done about apprentices and apprenticeships. So firstly, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whichever works best for you, depending on where you are in the world. It's great to have you here. I know we've got a few people attending today who haven't attended a ChatTalent webinar before. So just as a means of a quick intro, I'm Alan Walker. I'm your host for today. I'm also the editor of ChatTalent.com and the co-founder of a talent consultancy business called The Talent Finders. And we do some cool work with apprenticeship providers and large corporate apprenticeship and graduate recruitment teams. But anyway, that's my shameless plug over. Enough of me. Welcome to our speaker for today, Tony Allen. He's the CEO of Allen Apprenticeships and Skills. And many of you may know him from his previous roles with the Skills Funding Agency, where he held a number of senior positions there. And the last of those was as the director of the large companies unit, where he was responsible for contracts with corporate employers and the largest training providers. So hopefully that means he knows his stuff, and I know he knows his stuff. So Tony's going to talk to us today about a couple of things, including the apprenticeship reforms, effective apprenticeship recruitment tools, and how to work with educational institutes such as schools and colleges and universities to make the biggest impact. We'll be getting through quite a lot in a relatively short space of time, but hopefully we'll have room for your questions at the end as well. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop those into the Q&A box, which is accessed via a little button on your screen. It'll either be at the top or the bottom. It just says Q&A. Pop them in there rather than the chat. If they go into chat, I end up losing them, and we'll work through those either as Tony goes through his presentation, if there's a right moment to kind of pop in, or I'll leave them till the end and ask Tony when he gets to the end of his presentation. So I'll field those on your behalf. Don't worry, I'm not going to put you live on audio. We've got a lot of people here today, and it could be chaos if we do it that way. And we'll get through as many of those as we can. Any that we don't manage to tackle, me and Tony will pick up afterwards and come back to people on a one-to-one basis with answers to those. So enough of me, enough of my intro. As before, I said we will be wrapping up on time, so we'll be finishing a hard stop at 2:45. That's enough of me, so I'm going to hand you over to Tony now. Tony, are you there?
Hi, Alan. I am, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, to everyone who's listening. And thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully, Alan, just checking you can all hear me well?
Perfectly. Loud and clear, sir.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Okay, so as Alan says, we've got 45 minutes. We've now got 41 minutes to crack through this. So what are we going to be talking about this afternoon? Well, I want to effectively try and cover three things. One, talk briefly about the recent UK apprenticeship reforms, and accepting that there may be colleagues from overseas, but I'm sure it'll be quite interesting to you to see what's happening in the UK. We're going to be talking about some effective recruitment tools. In other words, how do you get hold of the best people to put on an apprenticeship program? And as part of that strategy, we're going to be talking about how to work with schools, colleges, and universities so that you can make the biggest impact. In good training styles, by the end of the session, hopefully you'll understand a little more about the key aspects of the apprenticeship reforms in the UK. You'll be able to identify how your own organisation can benefit from close links with schools, colleges, and universities. And you'll be able to think seriously about, if you haven't got them already, about how you can either develop or improve your own plans for effective apprenticeship recruitment. So that's enough of the intro. Let's crack on with some of the content. Apprenticeship reforms. Obviously, we've had apprenticeships in the UK, well, for centuries, arguably. But particularly since 2014, the government has instituted a whole set of reforms around apprenticeships that focus on three particular things. And I think they've been quite brave, actually, to try and tackle all of these things at the same time. Hasn't always gone entirely smoothly, but we are there or thereabouts with a lot of this stuff. So the first thing is that they've changed the product, the apprenticeship product itself. Prior to 2014, there was something like 7,000 different apprenticeship frameworks in the UK. And if you wanted to look at one, you know, it could be written on 10 sides of A4, or I actually saw one that was written on over 200. So fairly complex, quite turgid, quite difficult to understand. So the government decided they need to be simpler. So it instituted a rule that said we're going to change these. We're going to get employers to actually form the groups that develop apprenticeships. So over time, we're going to scrap all of the old frameworks and introduce new standards. Employers will come together and do that. And one of the key outcomes for simplicity is that whatever the content of the apprenticeship is, it has to be written on 2 or 3 sides of A4. So it's quite simple to understand. And the focus is on what you expect the person to be competent in by the time they've achieved their apprenticeship. The old framework was very much about training inputs, what you had to do from a training viewpoint. The new standard is all about, if you like, outputs or competencies. So a major change, and we're going through that at the moment. And I think the government's looking that by about 2021, all the old frameworks will have gone and we will solely be on a new set of standards. How many there will be, I don't know, but it will certainly be less than 1,000 compared with, as I say, the old 7,000. We're seeing a huge change in the way that the funding is organised and instigated. There is now a digital online service. So every employer, eventually, by the time we get to next year, April of 2019, every employer who wants to deliver an apprenticeship, whether they're big or small, will be able to register online, have their own account, and they will be able to see what apprenticeships there are, who the training providers are, how much money they're going to be spending, how much money they might get from the government, lots and lots of things to help them manage all of the issues around their apprenticeship program. And finally, the final and probably the most controversial, and certainly the change that's caused the most angst and comment over the last couple of years, is the apprenticeship levy. So if you're a big company, i.e. if your payroll is more than £3 million, then you will have to pay 0.5% over the 3 million as an apprenticeship levy. You can get that money back directly to spend on apprenticeship training and assessment. And indeed, if you operate in England, you can get 10% added to that figure. So in effect, you can get back 110% of what you contribute. So all of those things together have come together in a sense to really focus, raise the profile on apprenticeships, sort out the funding, give employers online access to their own account, and change the product to make it simpler and more streamlined. One of the questions I'm always asked is, yes, but apprentices can only be either 16 or 18. Well, who can be an apprentice? The answer is anyone can. There is a minimum age limit of 16 in the UK to be an apprentice, but there is no upper age limit. And there are, as we speak, apprentices now going for an apprenticeship program in their 60s and 70s. So it can be any age, quite literally. So obviously, new recruits. You can put somebody who you promote from one job to another onto an apprenticeship. And indeed, quite a lot of employers are doing that at the moment. Quite a lot of employers are taking advantage of the new management apprenticeships and giving that sort of training to team leaders or supervisors or junior managers. And that's a really effective way of upskilling those individuals. You can also put someone on an apprenticeship where you can demonstrate significant new learning in an existing role. So you've not promoted them, but their job has changed significantly, and you think that an apprentice framework might be the right vehicle for them to train and to develop. And that's a really effective way. And again, a question that's often asked is, somebody who already has a level of qualification can do an apprenticeship at a lower level. So again, in the UK, if you take somebody with a degree, which is a level 4 qualification, if that degree, say, is in geography, they could do a level 2 apprenticeship in engineering, because that falls into the new learning context. In other words, they know all about geography, but they don't know anything about engineering. So it's possible to put people on an apprenticeship in that context. So let's have a look at some of the solutions and some of the ways that you might think about bringing apprentices into the business. You can obviously recruit apprentices from age 16, as I've said. That's the minimum age limit for many apprenticeships. And that you would probably bring them into your business then at an apprenticeship at level 2 and level 3. So you might bring them in as a junior administrator, or in some similar role, and you can put them on an apprenticeship. Indeed, in the UK, the government give additional sums of money, £1,000, to employers who recruit 16 to 18-year-olds and put them on an apprenticeship program as an incentive, and as a recognition that probably quite a few 16 to 18-year-olds haven't yet got the concept of employability skills, and a bit more input is required in that respect. You can recruit them at 18. Again, you can recruit them from school, or they might have gone to college. And we're then perhaps starting to think about, well, they might have A-levels at this point. So it might be that we're going to put them on a level 3 apprenticeship, or even a level 4 apprenticeship, which might last 1-2 years. Again, there are a whole range of apprenticeships at that level across a whole range of industries that suit people in that respect. And finally, and it's a point I'll come back to a little bit later, just because somebody has a degree, as I've already referred to, doesn't mean they can't do an apprenticeship. So even recruiting people in at 21 or older than that, you might have brought them in from university, they're graduates. Again, you can think about, would an apprenticeship be a good way to particularly match the skills that they've already got through their degree? Would it be a good way of getting them to hone those skills and to complement those skills in the context of their new job? So if you're thinking about bringing people into the business, then there's just some thoughts as to what age you might think to do that. I know quite a few employers will say, yeah, we're not sure about recruiting 16-year-olds. Sometimes if it's an engineering context, health and safety is a factor. But often there are ways around that, and ways to comply with, for example, health and safety legislation that does enable you to bring in 16-year-olds. I know a number of engineering firms who have 16-year-old apprentices, and they make it work. So I think my point to you all is that if you've got a particular need, then you can make it work. So let's specifically focus on the sort of 16 to 24-year-old age group. That age group constitutes quite a large proportion of all apprenticeships. It's about 40%, 45% of them. And certainly in the UK, talking to employers, as I do on a regular basis, I'm finding that recruitment is more difficult and more challenging. Why? Well, in the UK, we've got relatively low unemployment, high levels of employment, low unemployment, and actually getting the right skills is becoming increasingly a challenge. We've got Brexit on the horizon, and the anticipation that not everybody from the EU who's currently over here working will wish to stay. Some will, some won't. And how do we replace those workers who decide to return home in Europe? And also increased competition. And by that I mean 16 to 18-year-olds actually have quite a lot of choice. At 16, you can stay at school and do your A-levels, and schools will do an awful lot to try and keep you there because you are worth money to them. As a 17 and 18-year-old in school doing your A-levels, you're worth a lot of money, and they will work hard to persuade you that that's what you need to do. But it may or may not be the right choice. You can go to college, and you can go and do a more vocational option in a college. At 16, you can go out and get a job. You can do an apprenticeship. So there's a lot of options and opportunities. And certainly in the UK, there's some big sectors that rely upon the 16 to 18-year-old cohort, particularly retail, to a slightly lesser extent hospitality, care, big employers of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who need 16 to 18-year-olds. And particularly in the context of Brexit as well, it's going to become more and more acute. So if you're into that 16 to 24-year-old market, then as I put on the bottom there, you absolutely need to be proactive in your recruitment. It is not just anymore about saying, oh, we've got a vacancy here, slap it on Indeed.com or any other job site or advertise it in the local paper or what have you. That's not being proactive, that's being reactive. You've got to be proactive. You've got to be thinking about, how can I get my company's name in front of young people almost before I need them? And it's having that proactive, upfront approach that I want to talk about now. So how do you promote your company to young people via their place of education? First of all, why would you want to do it? Well, as I've said, you're being proactive. You can genuinely get the best candidates. If you're working, for example, with a school or a college or a university in ways that I'll come on to describe in a minute, then you can genuinely get the best candidates. You're not just placing a job ad, you're doing work for their curriculum and other ways, and your name is there. It might be in the background, but it's there. And therefore, you can positively influence the attitudes of young people themselves and teachers and parents. And don't underestimate the impact that parents have upon what their 16, 17, 18-year-olds do. We tend to think these days of sort of young people being very independent and all the rest of it, and to a large degree they are, but an awful lot of them, despite what they might admit, still listen to mum and dad and still listen to what they think they want. So, and having that influence in a broader context, and we'll talk about how in a minute, is important. And as a spin-off here, there are benefits to your business and to your workforce. And I just want to give you a very quick case study. A few years ago, before I joined the civil service, and arguably when I had a proper job, I worked for Whitbread. And my job was to promote, or part of my job was to promote Whitbread to the world of education. And we used to get our branch managers, our restaurant managers, our hotel managers to go out and work with a local school or local college or even university and do it in a way that promoted the then Whitbread brands in their partner education establishments. And we called it our RAD strategy, because RAD stood for Recruitment, Awareness Raising and Development. Why did we do this? Because we wanted to recruit the best people. There's a hotel manager who used to do lots and lots of work experience. Work experience is not new. It's been around for lots of years, but he used to have work experience in his hotel for 2 weeks. He used to recruit 40% of his staff from those work experience students when they left school. He made sure they had a good experience on their work experience placement, and he then kept tabs, if you like, with the best ones, and he would recruit them full-time into his business. Our policy raised awareness of Whitbread. It raised awareness of all our brands. For example, on a smaller scale, we used to work with all schools. We did work with primary schools, And, you know, we used to get primary school students coming in and doing a maths lesson around a pizza, you know, the ingredients that go on it, how you can split a pizza up into, you know, segments and what percentage of the whole that was, and all of that sort of stuff. And then the D stood for development. And we used to use that to develop our own people. You know, believe you me, it's quite intimidating to get a junior manager who's just been on their presentation skills course to go and stand in front of a group of students and talk to them about their job, or to go and address a group of parents about a career in their industry. But it's a really good way of reinforcing their development. So there are definite and specific benefits to talk about. So how might you do this? How might you go about, if you like, influencing the world of education in and to get them thinking about your business? I've talked about work experience already. It is still a very good way of doing that. Work experience is no longer mandatory. It used to be mandatory in the UK. It isn't, but a lot of schools and colleges still see it as a very useful way of exposing their students and pupils to what is to come. So, you know, go and talk to your local schools about work experience opportunities in your business. Yes, you need to make an effort. You need somebody to monitor them, but it is well worth it. Staff and leaders mentoring, coaching and placements. You know, often teaching staff, senior leadership staff in schools and colleges can really benefit from having some exposure to the world of work. It's a bit of an old adage, but quite a lot of them went to school, went to university and went back to school and have never been out in the world of work as a lot of us know it. And it's a great way for them to understand more about what goes on, more about what we mean when we talk about employability skills. And it's a great way of exposing them to your business. And that's an opportunity for you to tell them about the job and career opportunities that you've got. You can do curriculum projects. I described that with the pizza example, where, you know, either through the development of materials that they might use in class, online, or physical materials, which can be based on your business, or other types of projects. It's a great way of getting schools and colleges and universities involved in thinking about things that are associated with your business. And then there's activities, you know, just general activities. So somebody will go in and talk to a group of students about a job or an industry or a particular aspect of their industry. For example, I was talking to somebody only yesterday who had recently been into a secondary school and had talked to 60 young people about what the world of retailing, what a supermarket might look like in 10 years' time, you know, and they were fascinated by how technology might change the way we shop. Well, again, you know, subliminally at least, that is having the effect of getting them to think about retail and maybe what opportunities there might be in a digital context to work in that sector in the future. You can mentor staff in schools. Again, quite a bit of demand for that in schools because they recognise that it's in their interests to get their staff developed. There's research and development opportunities, particularly in colleges and higher education. And if you've got a problem, if you've got an issue with your business or a difficulty, you know, go and talk to a college, go and talk to a university and see if they've got some students or staff who can think about that, who can help you with it, who can work on it. And it's surprising the number of times you get people who can see the wood for the trees. Sometimes in a business, it's really difficult to do that. There's a great opportunity there. And general activities that just describe your business and opportunities. So what are the challenges with this? Well, you need to pick which ones you want to work with. There's lots of schools, lots of colleges, lots of universities. You know where your business centres are, you know where your recruitment is, where you need people the most and of what type. So do some analysis and think about that. Use existing contacts where you can. So if you've got, you know, you'll have parents in your workforce, of course. Think about the role that they can play in this as well. Most of secondary schools these days are what we call independent academies in the UK. So in the old days, Local authorities could sometimes help you to get in touch with schools. That's far more difficult now because local authorities don't have the control anymore. So it does require you to do sometimes a bit of legwork and to go out and identify the most relevant schools. Very important, decide what sets you apart from the others who might also be trying to do this. You know, to use marketing speak, what's your USP? What can you offer to that school and college? There is a bit of a law change in the UK that from this month, schools and colleges have an obligation to let particularly training providers, but also in some circumstances employers, into their schools to promote specifically apprenticeships. So you might be able to do something on the back of that. So what does a good, what I'll call school engagement or college engagement program look like? You need to invest for the long term. You know, if you're in for a quick win here, then frankly, this might not be for you. You need a targeted approach, identify the right school, identify the right college. You need to be confident that you're going to get real opportunities, that you're going to have real opportunities for the young people that over time you can talk about. I would suggest that there's clear agreement between you and the school as to what you're going to get out of it, but equally, what are they going to get out of it? You know, this is a partnership. This is not a one-way street, and any school or college that you go and talk to will be expecting something back, you know, something in it for them. A great way to do this is to use what I've described as real people, and by that I mean former students, former apprentices. You know, there is nothing more powerful than a former student of that school who is now an apprentice with you, or was an apprentice and is now a junior manager or whatever, going back and saying, I sat where you did 5 years ago and now look at me, I'm doing this. And that's a really powerful tool. But, and it's the final point on the good side, you need to be very clear in apprenticeship terms where apprenticeships fit in your recruitment strategy. So in a sense, before you go out and do any of this stuff, you need to think, where do we want apprentices in our business? Where are they going to fit? How are we going to develop them? And then think about who it is we want and where we get them from. And, you know, the opposite of good is not good. And you can see the points there. Don't do this if you're after a short-term fix. You know, if you want people in the next 2 months, forget about it. You know, this is not a short-term fix. Advertise your vacancy on a website and good luck with that. But, you know, this is a longer-term strategy. Avoid a scattergun approach. Target your schools on where you need people. Don't try and work with 100 schools. You know, be sensible about how much time your people can invest in doing this, and target schools accordingly. Try to be specific about opportunities in the future, not vague, not woolly. It isn't a cheap option because you will have to invest some time and resource in this. And, you know, it's got to fit with your recruitment strategies. So coming towards the end, and there'll be an opportunity for questions. This isn't complicated, really. You know, just to reinforce what I've already said, target your schools or college, university, and work with them. Be clear about what you want. You know, what are you getting out of this? Be very open and honest about that, but also be very clear about what you're prepared to give in return. Be prepared at the beginning for some resistance. You know, not everybody in this world has a positive view of apprenticeships, particularly in schools whose targets are sometimes just about how many young people can we get to university. You know, so you might meet some resistance about this, but don't be put off by it. You know, make sure that you can set your stall out as to exactly what it is that you are prepared to give and what an apprenticeship in your business actually means. And try to demonstrate a long-term commitment. As I've said, this is not a short-term fix. I just want to quickly, my two final slides, the power of apprenticeships. There are now in the UK things called degree apprenticeships, where a young person over 3 or 4 years does an apprenticeship in a business. They're employed by the business. They do an apprenticeship at level 6 or 7, And they come out of it afterwards, not only with an apprenticeship, but with a degree. And a number of businesses are beginning to latch onto this, as I'll talk about in a second. But if you're interested in degree apprenticeships, the way it works is you've got a job. It has to be a specific job. You recruit people at 18 years old from one of your targeted schools that you've now decided you're going to be working with. You pay the apprentice a salary, and they do an apprenticeship program during that time as well as working for you. If it's a degree apprenticeship at level 6 or 7, after 3 or 4 years, they will have their apprenticeship, but also because you've been working with a university with degree awarding powers, and that's part of a degree apprenticeship package, they will also have a degree, and it's a perfectly fully validated, accredited degree from one of the 157 UK universities. And it might even be the same university that they have gone to full time to do their degree. If you've recruited them at 18, they've spent 4 years doing their degree apprenticeship with you. By the age of 22, you'll know quite a bit about them. You'll know their strengths, you'll know their development needs, but you'll know about them and they'll know about you as a business. The benefit for them is by the age of 22, they have a job with you and they have no debt, unless they've been particularly frivolous, but they will have no debt. Just contrast that with the conventional university degree route. They will go to university for 3 years, full-time at 18, so you don't see them. They come to you at 21, 22 with a degree, and you recruit them. But how much is their degree actually relevant to the job you want them to do? Or are you just recruiting them because they've got a degree and with all the attributes that someone who has got to a particular level through doing a degree has got, but do they really fit into what you want? They as individuals may have up to £50,000 worth of debt because of the UK system of funding full-time degrees. They're very new to you. They're new to the world of work. Yes, they might have had a part-time job somewhere, helping them out, but this is a full-time job, very new to the world of work. And what has university really taught them about work? Now, some universities are really good at doing this, but frankly, others are not. And just think about what you might want and what you might end up with. And my final slide really is I want to give you 2 very quick case studies. One, a very well-known high street bank in the UK took the decision 18 months ago now to halve their graduate recruitment. And they replaced those graduates that they didn't recruit with 18-year-olds on the new retail banking degree apprenticeship. Okay. And they're in a unique position of being able to compare and contrast the 2 cohorts of people who they've recruited. So half of them are 18-year-olds on a degree apprenticeship and the other half are 21, 22-year-olds who they brought into the business. And they are equal numbers. In year 1, they had no leavers from their degree apprenticeship, compared with 2 graduate leavers. Now, not a huge percentage of their graduate intake, but nonetheless, they had leavers. They expect to see that pattern continue to emerge throughout. They repeated it again last September, and they have now convinced themselves that this is a permanent approach for them, that they will recruit a significant number every year of 18-year-olds and put them onto the retail banking degree apprenticeship. They see the benefits. And that is a benefit that your business could have if you're recruiting at that level, at that higher level. Think about degree apprenticeships. The other one is a slightly lower level, but again, a high street name in terms of pet supplies, pet services retailer. They found it really difficult to recruit veterinary nurse apprentices into their business. Very difficult. I guess if you're thinking being a veterinary nurse, you would think first of going to work for an actual veterinary surgery rather than a shop on the high street that happens to engage pets. So in 2015, they began a series of relationships with 10 schools around the country. And it was a fairly standard package in many respects. They did work experience. So they offered the young people work experience in their offices and clearly in their retail outlets. They went into those schools and did careers talks. They offered teacher placements and all the rest of it. that has had an immediate effect on their recruitment problems. And since 2016, they have no longer had a problem in recruiting veterinary nurse apprentices. In fact, last year, they had an oversupply of candidates, purely because they are now investing time and resource in working specifically with schools, going in, talking to them, and talking to the young people about the sort of career opportunities they've got. Alan, I think I'm done. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everyone for listening, and very happy now to take any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. That was brilliant. Really insightful. Just the right level of detail and hopefully lots of food for thought for people to go away with and can interpret that and come up with ways of approaching schools, colleges, unis, etc. themselves. So it's brilliant. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions myself. I'm going to be greedy and ask those first. And then we've got 3 questions already lined up in the Q&A from the audience as well. So mine are relatively straightforward, hopefully. So we talked there about schools, it being in the interest of schools to keep people on for A-levels, and financially, that being the main driver. And you talk there about the onus being on employers going into schools and persuading the students otherwise that they should consider apprenticeships, etc. Is the government doing anything to help potential school leavers who really shouldn't be persuaded to stay on and do A-levels because it's not right for them, to not do that and to actually leave and go into an apprenticeship?
That's a great question, and you'd think that government should be doing that, and indeed, up until around 2011, 2012 in the UK, we had what was called an independent career service, whose job it was to go into schools and to facilitate discussions with employers and training providers and others to enable young people to be a bit more informed about career opportunities. That mandatory obligation was scrapped by the UK government on the basis that this is more of letting the market decide. So there is no mandatory obligation on schools to do that. It is entirely down to the schools to the extent to which they invite employers, etc., in to come and talk about their careers opportunities. So you can't rely on any government-backed service to do this for you.
Okay, excellent. Well, not excellent, terrible, but an excellent answer. And very, very, very insightful. So another thing that's just come up, and actually it came up via the chat, people were just sharing some experiences of how apprentices they've recruited have been influenced by parents. And a lot of them are saying, actually, a massive percentage are listening to parents. But the problem is, parents aren't very well educated always in terms of what options are out there. And one example that Adrian Bird and Ben Drain talked about was that actually parents sometimes can have a very biased view. The very obvious example is that parents sometimes think that IT jobs aren't for girls, for example. And then that kind of bias self-perpetuates itself and just carries on. And what can we do to tackle that and to target parents and educate them in a better way?
I mean, you're absolutely right. I spent 25 years of my working life working in the hospitality industry, which I think has a possibly slightly better reputation now than it did 25 years ago. But, I've been at careers fairs on a whitbread stand and have seen parents actively steer their offspring away from coming and talking to us because we don't want you working in a pub or a restaurant. So completely familiar with the issue. Again, I think there's a huge opportunity for businesses here to say to schools, do you have parents' evenings? Why don't you? I know of one company who actually got a couple of their schools to put on parents' careers evenings because they didn't have them historically. And, they got the school to get a number of employers, not just them, but they were instrumental in organising this, to come along. Parents came along, and it is a great opportunity for businesses to try that conversion bit. You're right. A number of parents have a poor view around apprenticeships, but this is part of a bit of the hard work associated with all of this, that it can be done. You can get schools to do parents' evenings, and that's your opportunity to go along as well. I think things like work experience can also help in all of that. because obviously the young people, after each day, go home and talk to their parents about what they've been doing and all the rest of it. And it's really good if you can make that a really positive experience. So they're talking up all of the opportunities that you might have.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to work through some of the questions from the audience now in no particular order. So a question here from Helen Murdoch. She would like to know, are there any statistics around the amount of people who leave an apprenticeship, say halfway through or partway through?
Well, there are, and we are talking across the whole range of apprenticeships that about 70% complete, somewhere around there, give or take a few percentages. It's about that figure. Now, there's all sorts of reasons why people don't complete, and it's the wrong job. Not everybody starts off a job and likes it. Sadly, they were made redundant. It just wasn't for them. All the sort of normal reasons associated with any job in any business as to why people leave. But it is around about 7 in 10 complete.
Okay. And is that something that the government are particularly worried about? Would they like that to be high? Well, of course, I'd like it to be higher, but is there a target in mind in terms of completion?
I'm not sure there's a target in mind, but yes, of course, government is very keen to increase that number. And, it will be interesting now that arguably indirectly employers are paying for apprenticeships. Prior to the introduction of the levy, larger employers would just draw down money from this amorphous pot. Now, they can identify how much they're paying in and how much they're getting out. And I think that might have an interesting effect on the way apprenticeships are delivered and managed. A subject that I could talk about for hours. But I think we will see a continual rise in the quality of apprenticeships.
Okay, excellent. So I've still got a few more to get through. I'm not going to be timekeeping Hitler today. If we do overrun by a couple of minutes, I think that's absolutely fine. So Adrian Bird's asked a couple of questions. He would like to know how you would respond to Mike Cherry from the FSB's comments this week that apprenticeships are too complex for SMEs to understand.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, but I often find myself not agreeing with the FSB. If you get the right training provider, if it's a small business, you get the right training provider, they will take away a lot of the pain and anguish that can be associated with apprenticeships. And the trick is finding the right provider to help you do this. Yes, there are requirements like the 20% off job training element. But, at the end of the day, you are getting somebody trained, even as a small business. The maximum you will pay is only 10% of the actual cost. Government pays 90%. And to my mind, it's not unreasonable that you as a business make a bit of an effort under those circumstances where you're getting a heavily subsidized training program to try and understand things. As I've said, find yourself a good training provider and they will help you enormously.
That leads me quite nicely to a question somebody else has asked. The name is in his careers, and unless they're a Brazilian footballer who's given themselves one name, I think that might be an anonymisation of their actual name. But the question is, where can we find information on good apprenticeship providers?
Go on to the apprenticeship website, which I think is www.apprenticeships.gov.uk. And there you can research apprenticeship frameworks, you can research apprenticeship providers, and the government are going to be moving to a point where they are going to step up the information that they provide on training providers. But certainly that's a great place to start.
Okay, perfect. Do you know of any training providers that charge for the recruitment of apprentices? This is a question from Natalie. And should they?
Well, an awful lot of training providers will recruit an apprentice for you as an employer if you want them to. An awful lot of them don't charge you for that. Okay, so it's part of the service, if you like. I do know of one or two who do charge because, in a sense, recruiting somebody is different to them being on an apprenticeship program. So in a sense, it's not part of the apprenticeship. But you will find a lot of training providers will at very least help you recruit, particularly young people, if you find it quite difficult to do it yourself.
I guess it's in their interest for you to recruit because it means they're going to go onto a program. But on the flip side of that, if they're spending money to recruit that person, then some of that money that they've spent on recruiting them might not be spent on training them.
Yes, I mean, for each apprenticeship standard and framework, the government pays the training provider a set amount of money, and that's, you can find out what the value of each of those is. Now, if you want the training provider to recruit somebody as well, then, it is possible to sort of get a discount on that, but don't expect too much of a discount if you want them to recruit for you too.
No, understood. Okay, cool. So I've got two more questions I'm going to get through. Sorry, three. One from Ben Drain. Have you seen any providers and universities struggling to link up due to the conflicts between Ofsted and QAA requirements?
That's a really, really interesting question. I mean, I haven't, I've heard of such things, but I've never personally seen or witnessed it. I mean, the quality aspects of apprenticeships under the Ofsted Common Inspection Framework can be different to the requirements of universities, and that can sometimes cause them to at least pause and think about how it might all work. So I understand what's behind his question, but it depends, I guess, would be my answer, and I'll need another hour, Alan, to explain all of that.
And I'll let Ben perhaps link out. There must be a reason for that question, I'm assuming.
Experience, by the sounds of it.
Yes. Another question from Adrian. Adrian would like to know, are there any plans for intermediaries to be able to access the digital accounts in some way?
Not at the moment. The government has this idea that the best training providers, and it's yet to entirely decide what it means by that and what the criteria are, will be able to help employers do a lot of the online stuff. At the moment, only the employer can log on and fill in all their details and do all the bits and pieces. The government has said that it is looking at the possibility of allowing training providers to access employer accounts to at least help them with some of the admin around all of this. But more details to follow on that, I think.
Okay, excellent. And final question. We've overrun by 5 minutes, but shoot me, I was enjoying myself. Lots of good questions today. This one's from Rory Brown. Rory would like to know, with the focus on schools seeming to be the most logical approach, as you've just communicated clearly, and with some great results, what part do you feel that apprenticeship-specific job boards can play? And if you were running a job board yourself, what could you do as a job board provider to help employers?
I'm not entirely sure what he means by the expression job board, if I'm honest.
So he's probably thinking things like get my first job.
Yeah. Okay. All of that stuff. Well, I mean, again, you see, I think there's maybe an opportunity here for those types of organisations, to themselves be talking to schools and be talking to employers. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can just see a bit of a perfect triangle here between a school, one of these websites and an employer sort of working together, particularly using the technology that a lot of these websites now use, to really positively influence. Now, that might well be happening somewhere. I'm not aware of it, but it might well be. So, yes, I think there are opportunities for them, definitely.
Perfect. And Natalie, you've just asked another question about other potential job boards for apprenticeships. Drop me a line, Natalie, after the session, because we do need to finish now, really, and I'll come back to you on some ideas around that. So that's it, Tony. Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated. Everybody who's attended, thanks for coming along. The recording will be sent out to you guys and to everybody who registered who couldn't make it live. We are running another apprenticeship-themed webinar back towards either the end of February or early March, more of a talking head style. I'm hoping Tony can join us for that as well. And we're going to have a few employers coming along and talking about their own experiences. So I do hope you can join us. We'll communicate that out back in middle of February sometime. And other than that, enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alan.